So picking up right where we left off, here is the stock SC14 pulley. Here is my first smaller pulley that I thought was 93 millimeters, and here is a real 93 millimeter pulley. The reason it was so hard to find one of these at first was because they came on non-US Corollas from, I think, the early aughts. But yeah, here we go for the measurement of the 93 millimeter pulley. There we go, 93. Here is the second mystery pulley. We got 105. And then here is the original pulley. We got about 109, 110. So the 109 to 105, very, very small jump, and that's why we only made a little bit more boost. Then there was all that agony trying to get the boost back somehow, look for belt slip, etc. And then finally, here's going to be our new, correct, smallest pulley. Worth noting that these do have the same size coils. So here's the coil for the 93 millimeter pulley. It fits into the 105 millimeter just fine. So I can use my same coil that I modified, and the exact same approach for mounting the pulley's clutch. So basically sawed it out of here, and then drilled and tapped 4 holes and bolted it on with a couple washers for spacing. So yeah, this should be fully ready to go into the car. And if I hook it up like so, it's all powered up. And here we've got these two locked together. And now we're at this point where, depending on the boost level we make, we can choose to amp up the coil and increase the clamping force here. But yeah, very excited to see where this goes. Alright, so I'm finally installing the smaller 93 millimeter pulley using the shorter, slightly shorter 1015 belt. And the tensioner ends up about 1/3 of the way in. So I think this is where my initial purchase of a 100-inch belt, it could have worked, but this should be fine as well. So yeah, now that that is on, just need to put the pulley on and tighten it down, and also figure out how many shims and whatnot to install. Here's that. I'm gonna lightly tap that in to see what the final gap will be like. Okay, since that is just dragging, I'm guessing that when I tighten the nut on here, it'll actually be interfering, so I might need to add a little shim in there. Okay, so just installed, and actually it looks really good without shims. So yeah, this will be ready to start up, see how much PSI we're making, and go from there. Alright, now that this is all plugged in, wired up, I want to conduct an experiment, and that is, does the supercharger quiet down when its access to input air is restricted? So instead of this thing pumping air in a circle when the charge pipe is open, what if it just had to pump a vacuum, essentially not compressing any air? So what I'm going to do is start it up, listen to the new, probably much louder idle whine when the supercharger pulley is engaged, and then I'm going to shut it down and put caps here and here, and just the same thing again. Okay, so here we go. So supercharger inlets are capped off. This would simulate putting another throttle body in here to block supercharger airflow when it's not turned on. Let's see how it sounds. Whoa. It is a lot quieter. Oh. What on earth? Huh. Let's go. Okay, so that was a very flawed test because I actually had this throttle closed, which restricts the air coming in the alternate path. So the engine was actually trying to breathe through the supercharger with blocked off airflow. So let's try that one more time, but with like this throttle open and the supercharger running. Okay, simple jumper wire should do the trick. So now when the bypass is given power to open up, when it's in NA mode, the supercharger will also get power to start spinning. So let's try it again. Okay. It is a lot louder. You can tell it's pulling a strong vacuum. But otherwise running okay. So I'm glad I did that test. I basically concluded there's no noise benefit to making the supercharger pump a vacuum. It's possible that there would be an efficiency benefit. If I needed a supercharger to stay always on, it might be more efficient for it to be kind of not pumping a lot of air through it. But yeah, I'm gonna pause on the idea of installing another throttle body here to control airflow to the supercharger. Let's just leave it as it is, and yeah, actually test out the smaller pulley. Okay, so I'm recording just to capture what's happening near redline, where it's sputtering a little bit. So I felt it kind of like once or twice right before redline kind of give out as though it was misfiring. So I'm going to look back and see if there were any fuel pressure drops. Okay, so having just watched that clip, I saw fuel pressure dip to 35 psi down from 50 a couple times. And from my perspective, that can only mean one thing: the factory fuel pump not keeping up. So far, there's not really much evidence to suggest the injectors need to be upgraded, so I'm kind of dragging my feet on doing that, even though I've got them in hand, because of just how much more difficult it is to reach the injectors. But the fuel pump, it only takes a minute to pull the rear seat out of its little latches. These guys hook into right here. So yeah, I'm gonna lift up that cover, or maybe it's that one, and then take a look at what's inside. Hopefully can just drop this new basket right in. Okay, so I've got all the little bolts out. I've just undone the two clips for these two lines. Whoa! I should have probably released the fuel pressure before starting on this. All right, well, that was a pretty stressful fuel pump install for me, because even though I had the whole hanger put together, it was like half an inch too tall to be compressed fully within the tank. Turns out when you put it in, all those springs and rods all need to like fully seat, fully compress. Wasn't going in, so I had to make some modifications. The most notable was pulling the wires directly through the housing, and I like kind of epoxied them to seal it. Miraculously, the fuel pressure is correct. So here we got 53, so we're still around 50 psi. And yeah, I think at this new tune, which is making around 5.5, 6 psi at most, we're a bit overdue for a quick 0 to 60 run. So here goes that. Let's rev it up, and we're still going to use the pedal switch. Okay, so that was interesting. I felt quite a big bog at high RPM. So I wonder if maybe that was a fuel delivery problem, because I don't think we hit red line exactly. Interesting. So I had a hint of that same bogging before the fuel pump install, but I also had big fuel pressure drops. Now I think the fuel pressure drops are gone, but there's still that significant hesitation. Yeah, that's not great. Bad news. So driving the next day, I'm seeing fuel pressure about half of what it should be, maybe 2/3 at 27 instead of 50. So I'm wondering if maybe a hose has come loose or something got kinked in the pump. So I'm just gonna limp it home, probably swap back to the stock carrier, fuel basket, and go from there. Alright, so after installing that fuel pump, I was still seeing the fuel cut, and I concluded that the fuel cut must be caused by the stock fuel injectors running out of duty cycle. So obviously the ECU would know through math, you know, how many milliseconds of duty cycle is available in a revolution or 2 revolutions at a certain RPM. And if it's exceeding that, then I think what the ECU was doing was actually cutting off fuel and probably spark, essentially acting like a rev limit to protect itself, because that's better than the alternative of just sailing on through and leaning out and, you know, damaging the engine when you're at this high RPM, high load state. So all that is to say, now I am putting in the upgraded Subaru STI, the blue fuel injectors. Oh, and then one other unfortunate note, I actually had to downgrade the fuel pump. It was working fine, providing 50 PSI, but I noticed on the way back from work today that I had about half the fuel pressure I expected. So I assume this means that the hose that I installed last minute, in order to buy myself a little bit more room to squish this into the fuel tank, is like not sealing well. It's just got a barb fitting at the top and at the bottom that it's going into. I don't have clamps on either of those fittings, so I assume that's why it had this like partial fail state. I'm really happy I was able to drive back, you know, at half fuel pressure basically. So it just, you know, adjusted the fuel trims and kept the car running. But yeah, so I don't know actually that the factory fuel pump is insufficient. So we're back on the factory fuel pump. We should be seeing decent fuel pressures. And not until we get the new injectors in and we're able to run without running out of duty cycle will we know if we have like a little bit of a fuel pressure drop near red line and whether we need a bigger fuel pump. I'm pretty optimistic. Right now we've got enough fuel pump for, you know, from 0 to 6,200-ish RPM before we run out of duty cycle. I think once we fix the duty cycle issue, I'd be surprised if we start seeing those fuel pressure drops just before redline. If we do, though, I think I will need to look into a more compact fuel pump. So the stock one is only like 3-ish inches tall, top to bottom. The AEM one I had tried to install was an extra like half an inch or more on top of that. And that's what caused all the headaches trying to fit it into the stock hanger. So yeah, I'm sure that they sell even more compact fuel pumps. I just don't want to have to mess with it, and you know, whether some aftermarket fuel pump fails down the road. So yeah, back to it. So I'm unbolting the Supercharger and getting access to the shields over the stock injectors, and ultimately to the fuel rail, which is right here. It's held down by a couple of bolts just along the top. And yeah, once out, I should be able to unplug the injector harnesses right there, and the injectors themselves just kind of get squished in between the rail and the head. So yeah, hopefully can clean all that up, install the new ones. All right, so the Supercharger had to take a step out for clearance, and that helped a lot. It's actually a piece of cake with the Supercharger out of the way. Here's the fuel rail. Just popped out both injectors, ready to be swapped. So I'll just set that there for a minute. And yeah, hopefully all the O-rings and everything else are exactly the same. And here we go to this side. Same thing here, just much worse access. But yeah, there's our fuel rail out of there. Here's a quick comparison of old versus new. So dimensions look basically identical. Okay. And assemble the fuel rail, ready to go back in. I'm gonna clean up that fuel injector port first though. Okay, all 4 injectors are now reinstalled. And to verify that there were no fuel leaks, I actually just primed the engine a number of times, even without starting it. And, you know, after you prime it 3, 4, 5 times, you reach the normal system fuel pressure because the pump is run, you know, for a few seconds at that point. I made sure that there were no leaks, and then I put everything back together. Slapped the shields back over the fuel rails, and then remounted the supercharger. While I was in there, I also reinforced some of the piping so that it wouldn't make any more like clanging sounds when I went over bumps. At least I think that that's what was happening. Yeah, so that was that. Okay, first drive with the factory fuel pump back in, but the STI blue injectors. Before I started it up, I did make an edit to my tune to adjust the estimated injector flow rate scaling from 330 or so up to the 565 that the injectors are rated for, and I'm quite impressed. The fuel trim, when I'm at closed loop fueling, it's like within 10%. I was definitely expecting it to be way off, but yeah, that's very promising. Okay, so far everything looks pretty good. Let's do a quick 0 to 60 run. Nice. I was actually surprised by how hard the real rev limit hit around 65. I think that's perfect. No more stumbling. Also, the AFRs looked pretty good, but I will need to review this exact video to see if there was any fuel pressure drop at high RPM. I think that would be the last thing that would push me to want to upgrade the factory fuel pump. But yeah, this is amazing. It pulls really hard. I might cut to yet another 0 to 60 run and share some posts of the logs of like an extended acceleration. So just looking for that AFR to hover around, you know, 12 or a little bit less. Well, that was something else. I really like how the car took to the new injectors, and I feel like I finally caught a break with some part of this project. Like putting the factory fuel pump back in, putting in new injectors and retuning changing a single value, and it's running beautifully. So super happy with this. For anyone doing this type of boosting in the future, you probably don't need to upgrade your fuel pump at all. I imagine if you wanted to do like E85 or whatever, or you know, have a turbo or a centrifugal supercharger, you might want to consider that. But no, for like even 5 psi, I would guess maybe in the ballpark of like 220, 230 crank horsepower. You do not need a tune. Sorry, you do not need a fuel pump. So yeah, I mean, with that, I think I'm gonna conclude this series. Like, the unit works really reliably. It is completely quiet and out of the way until you floor it. And yeah, I really can't wait to take this on a longer trip. As far as like other questions like bouncing around or potential ways to improve this in the future, I guess the only outstanding questions or thoughts I have would be, what octane do I need to run? Should I adjust any of my engine timing? And yeah, I mean, that's mostly it. Oh, and potentially, am I missing any small amount of boost due to boost leaks? But I actually don't care because I think this is the perfect amount of boost for the car. So hitting, you know, like between 5 and 6, you know, 5.5 or so, feels awesome. So with that, huge thanks to anyone who watched this, and if you have any questions at all about the project, please, you know, comment. I will usually respond very quickly, and yeah, like and subscribe if you want more content like this. But otherwise, it'll probably be back to your regularly scheduled autocross videos and stuff. So yeah, see you guys later. Peace.